There's no blanks.
And chapter 17 through chapter 26 actually is a section of Leviticus that's identified as the holiness code. The whole time that this is being written and everything that's written here is all about returning back to the Lord and living according to the holiness standard that God has established. What Leviticus is talking about here in chapter 17 specifically is blood guiltness. And blood guiltness is an extremely important concept for us to understand. Most people really don't understand it, but we should. It's here in chapter 17. It's also in Deuteronomy chapter 21. Deuteronomy chapter 21 goes into more detail, and chapter 17 here in Leviticus lays the groundwork, identifies it, but chapter 21 of Deuteronomy really takes us down the road and identifies what God has prescribed for curing it and dealing with it and all of that. I'd like to get into chapter 21, but Pastor Bruce is actually teaching that this Torah study. I don't know if he's going to touch on this subject. Most pastors skip over it because they don't want to have to deal with a subject that they feel like, well, that's Old Testament and we don't necessarily deal with it in New. But I don't know what Pastor Bruce is going to do. We'll have to wait and see. So anyway, as you look at your notes, it's talking about the holiness code. The idea is that God, Yahweh, has chosen Israel, and because he's chosen them, they have a responsibility to conduct their lives in a holy manner, just like you and I do. We're responsible to live a holy life. It just comes with the territory. God thinks enough about us. Hi, Carol. Good to see you. God thinks enough about us to call us to be his sons and daughters. And so consequently, as such, we should try to live a life that is pleasing to him. Now, I don't have my notes up on the screen. You have all the notes. I can put them up and take your faces off. If you'd rather not have your faces shown all over YouTube, I can do that. If you'd like, if you don't care, raise your right hand and swear after me. I do not care if somebody sees my face. Okay, all right, good. And for the rest of you, then if you stay in the dark, you'll be perfectly fine. So in Leviticus 19, verse 2, of course, that's the verse that says, you shall be holy, for I, Yahweh, your God, I am holy. That is the principal basis for this whole section that we're going to be going through. Now, the focus of Leviticus changes here from addressing the priests. Most of what we've talked about all the way up until now has been the responsibilities of the priest and what they are supposed to do, and we're supposed to know what they're supposed to do because we have to interact with them, and it becomes our responsibility to know as much as they know. Actually, it's a misnomer for us to think, well, when you come to church, for example, well, the pastor knows everything. Well, if you believe that, you're in for big trouble, because pastors are just like you. They know what they study. Some pastors study a lot. Some pastors hardly study at all. And so reality is, when all is said and done, the pastor will never hold your hand when you stand before the Lord and the Lord asks you anything. It's all going to be you. So it's really a good idea for all of us to study ourselves, to take what any pastor, teacher, anybody has to say with a grain of salt, if you will, and read it for yourself and look at it. And, not to say that pastors are ignorant. I'm not saying that at all. We all do the best we can with the time we have. But, my perception, and I want to say this because a lot of people always have this question. Between Pastor Vince, Pastor Bruce, and myself, we have three people with probably 5 opinions. And, it's just typical. We don't always agree. We're not in uniformity. We're in unity. And unity means that you can have more than one opinion about a subject and still be in unity. You're just not in uniformity. Uniformity is like when you're in the military and everybody's marching. Well, you wear the same uniform, you march with the same foot patterns. That's uniformity. Everybody's in lockstep. And the guy that's out, he gets thrown in the back and becomes a road guard. For those of you who've been in the military, you know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, exactly. So, but for us that are part of the Lord's army, we can be in uniformity and have different opinions and be absolutely perfectly fine in being united together in the body of Messiah. You do not have to believe exactly as I believe to be right. Okay? I may think that way, but, that doesn't matter. I have to, I've had to learn that because I learn stuff and, I think, well, this is the way it is. Well, that's fine because that's how I'm thinking. But if you think from a different perspective, you will have different understandings and come to different conclusions. And, as long as it does not negate what Yeshua has accomplished for us, you're going to be, for the most part, in pretty good stead. So let's not get too excited if people teach something that you haven't thought of necessarily in the past. It's okay. They could be wrong, but they also could be right. That's why it's so incumbent upon you and I to do our own research and our own study. Okay. And I just want to remind everybody of that. I know most of us here do that, but it's just real important that we keep that in mind. So the focus here has changed from off of what the priests were doing and is now addressing all of Israel. And when I say all of Israel, I'm talking about not only the nation of Israel, the Hebrews that crossed over, but everyone who has joined themselves to Israel as well. Because what we find in Leviticus chapter 17 is God is addressing the native born as well as every other person that's joined themselves to Israel. Which one of the major things we have to realize is that if you joined yourself to Israel, you not only receive the benefit of the covenants that God has made with Israel, but you also are then responsible for living according to the terms of those covenants. It doesn't mean that you have to become a Jewish person. You can continue to be from the nations and be loved by God just as well as a Jewish Hebrew Israelite. God doesn't differentiate. He loves us all. But it is incumbent that when you join with Israel, which is what Paul talks about, of course, in Romans 11, when we join with Israel, we have the responsibilities to do the things that Israel has done. So, number one in our notes here under B is all Israel includes the mixed multitude that had joined with Israel. If you remember in Exodus chapter 12:38, How many people left with the sons of Jacob? I mean, if you wanted to be very particular and say, well, this is only for the Jewish people. Well, you got to realize the sons of Jacob were in Israel for 400 years. America has only been in existence for a little over 200 years. How many mixed marriages do we have in America? I mean, you've got every mixture you can imagine, and we're only halfway there. And so another 200 years, the mixed multitude that went out, they could have been sons of Shem. They could have been Semites. They could have been Egyptians that married into and married a Hebrew. A Hebrew could have married an Egyptian. There were all kinds of other people that had moved to Egypt. It's like America. On one hand, Egypt was the greatest country in the world at that time. They had the most power. They had the most prosperity. Well, if you heard about it, wouldn't you want to go there? And so people did. They immigrated. And so when Israel left, you have to realize that what the people in the whole nation that would comprise Egypt, what they saw was a God who came into town and was in control of the weather, of nature, did all of these miraculous things. And it's like, whoa, we've never seen anything like this. And he's saying, come follow me, if you will. Well, what would you do? I mean, let's put it this way. This is a dangerous thing for us on one hand, but something we need to consider. If in America we have a visitation by somebody who comes to town and performs extraordinary miracles, does extraordinary things, how many people are going to follow that person? All kinds of people. Well, for you and I, we have a little bit of knowledge which says that, wait a minute, if this person is coming that's going to do this, God's word says there's going to be a false Messiah that's going to come and do all kinds of signs and wonders. So, we have a heads up on one hand. We're hopefully not going to fall for that and follow the anti-Messiah. But for Israel, when Moses showed up and he came for the lost sheep of Israel, he came to the people that knew God, and Moses is saying to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and this is what we're doing here. So those people followed him. Now the mixed multitude, they were just following the crowd, if you will. And I want to make that point so we see it. They were following the crowd of the spectacular. And so when we get out into the wilderness, we find that those that had difficulty in trusting Moses and were problematic, if you will, a great number of them are identified as being of the mixed multitude. The Jewish community always points to that group. It was those guys. Those are the ones that were the problem. Now, it could be. I wasn't there, so I can't honestly say one way or the other. But we have to look at it and realize that when people just follow after something as spectacular, they're not really necessarily invested in it. And so, for right now in America and in our world, we are watching a lot of stuff going on. And I'm not comparing it to being spectacular as God's doing, but there is a whole lot of stuff going on in our world that literally is trying to initiate a millennial reign in America and in the world. And the millennial reign that they're trying to initiate is one apart from God, apart from Yeshua. The very same things that the millennial reign will accomplish with having no police, because who will be the police? God's people are to be the police. We are responsible for keeping God's laws. In other words, if there's a murderer, which we can talk about here with our blood guiltiness, if there's a murderer, God has prescribed that that murderer shall not live, period. In other words, there shall be no jails to put murderers into, that we will put them in there for life and keep them in a cell. God did not prescribe that. He prescribed if somebody shed another man's blood, that they were to die. And it had to be carefully searched out. And the standard was God's standard. And so God's people are going to be responsible in the millennium as Yeshua is ruling with a rod of iron, saying, these are my laws, these are what I have established. That's why it's so important to read Leviticus and Deuteronomy and study through the Torah to know what God has said and prescribed. So right now, people are saying, let's do away with the police, let's do away with jails, let's do away with all of this judgment stuff, and just let everybody have their own way. Well, that is what the church wants, but they want it with Yeshua. But they haven't really thought it through in regards to the responsibility that goes along with that system. God has said that he's going to divide it up. There will be those that will be over 10, those that will be over 100, those that will be over 1,000, and they'll be responsible. Well, the basic unit of responsibility, even right now, is the family unit. If you have a husband and a wife, the husband is responsible for what takes place in the home. And most of us have to admit that the majority of homes, it's the wife who is the more responsible one and more spiritual one, unfortunately, in way too many households. And it is the very thing that has destroyed the fabric that the church is supposed to establish. Now, very interesting to me is in one of the states in America, that guess who stood up and said, yeah, defund the police, get rid of them. We will volunteer to keep the law. And, you know, the Muslim community stood right up and said, we will enforce Sharia law right now. I mean, we're ready. And where's the church? Where's God's people? Where are they saying, yeah, put us in charge again? See, we don't even carry the concept that we're supposed to be in charge. We've lost it. We've delegated it so much to the government institutions that we don't even think of ourselves as being responsible before God to enforce his laws and keep society under control by starting in the home, dad being responsible for his sons and his daughters, knowing where they are, what they're doing, disciplining them, keeping them under check. That is the very basic unit. And then, of course, we have the church, which when you have problems of a bigger nature within the church is supposed to be responsible for disciplining people that are part of the fellowship. But, you know, we go, well, nobody listens to the church. If you discipline them, they go down the street and go to this church down the road. Well, yeah, they do, because pastors don't have any integrity to say, wait a minute, where are you coming from? And who are you? and calling up and saying to the pastor they just walked out of his fellowship, what's with this guy? Why is he here? Most pastors are, oh, look, we got new members. We got new people. Yay, come on in, come on in. Y'all welcome down here. Yeah, I mean, pay your tithe and we're all happy. So, you know, the reality of what we're learning and what we should be learning in Leviticus 17 is that God is saying we are to be holy. We are to actually be in charge. Now, remember, the text tells us that the whole world is waiting in anticipation of the revelation of the sons of God. Why is the world waiting for that to happen? It's not, the world is not waiting for Yeshua. It's waiting for the sons of God and the daughters of God to be revealed. Those that know who we are and understand what we are supposed to do in ridding the land of blood guiltness. All right? So a little bit of soapbox stuff there for a moment. But if you get the idea that we are responsible for what we are seeing on the streets right now, because we have turned it over to the government. And the same thing we did with welfare. The church is supposed to take care of the poor. But, you know, why should we do it when government can do it? And so we established a welfare system with no accountability. Just give them money. They'll be fine. You know, Lyndon Johnson, with his Great Society, established housing for those fine Black Lives Matter people. He established it on purpose, and he said terrible things about the Black community. He said, if I give them this housing and give them a place to live and give them just enough money to get by, they will vote for me forever, because I'm giving them just enough to get them into public housing where we know where they all are. And they have just enough money to just get by. And if they got just enough money to get by, they won't want to work. And so segregation works very well when you dangle the carrot of no accountability. You don't have to go to work. Just stay in your house, make babies, and we'll pay you more. But we also are going to set up Planned Parenthood right down the street, so you can abort those babies that you're making. And you know what? That was the whole purpose of Planned Parenthood by Margaret Sanger. She wanted to control Black population. And that's what she has done. And it's like craziness today that the church is sitting here, whether it's white, black, brown, red, or yellow, makes no difference. We've all done the same thing. We've turned it over to the government and said, let the government handle it. Well, the government has handled it. And what has it turned out to be? Only thing we've accomplished is we've removed God from every institutional sanctioned body that's part of our government. The schools, the welfare system, I mean, everything. God is not part of that. The government doesn't want God involved. And so, you know, we basically, the church has shot itself in the foot by turning everything back to the government to handle. And now the church is going, well, it's such a mess. Look at this, man. We you know, do we dare to get back together? I mean, if you're a church, I mean, they're boycotting. They're, you know, wanting to tear down statues of Jesus, everything. You know, well, why is that? It's because we have stepped away from our calling and we've given it to other institutions. And, you know, when God says on the highway that leads to heaven, we are to remove the stones that are on the highway. those stones, when you look up that word that's used for stones there, it means institutions. They are institutions that are in the way of going and returning back to God. And that means churches. Big churches are in the way of returning back to God. When you've got churches that are ordaining homosexuals, you got churches that are promoting all of the very things that God calls an abomination. And, you know, those are institutions that should be eliminated. And yet they are still operative within the body of Christ. And it's like, well, they are Christians. Well, really? If you know what God has done all the way through Leviticus so far, everything he does is about division and separation and identifying as clean or unclean, holy or unholy. He does not work with tolerance and all inclusiveness. That is not God. That is man. Man saying, oh, we should love everybody. Well, God said, yeah, you should love everybody. But when they're doing these things, I do not like and appreciate that. And I want you to deal with it. But we don't want to. And that's going to be our future for some time to come, is the fact that we are here and we're facing the very things that God has established that we're responsible for that are out of order. And we're going, who's going to fix it? Are we going to raise up another government institution to fix it? Are we going to vote for the right president to fix it and hope that that president is going to be the solution? Most people, that's what they're thinking. Well, if we get President Trump in, he will fix it. Well, President Trump's going to do a lot of wonderful things. I really believe that if he's in, he will. But he is not going to restore the church to its position that God has called the church to occupy. The only one that's going to do that is you and I, when we have the audacity to start to stand up and say, okay, enough of what's going on. We need to clarify and identify who we are, what we're about, and why we're about. And that means going to other churches, going to other fellowships, and communicating. Because, poor little Shiloh with 200 people, we go, oh, we're going to turn the world upside down. We got to turn us upside down first. We've got to be turned upside down to the point that we are so fed up with what we're looking at that we're willing to get out of our homes and off of, if you will, Zoom, and get into a place where we actually are communicating with people that we can sit down and talk to. Me teaching and saying these things, even what Pastor Bruce taught last week, you know what? In this year, out this one. People hear it and they move on. But what really works is when you talk to your family and friends and you can articulate what has happened. And you can take them to the word and show them, this is what God says we're supposed to be doing. But it's not what we're doing. It's not what we've been doing for 80 years or 100 years. And so, to try to reverse it, God took Israel out of Egypt, and for 40 years, he trained them by establishing rules and regulations that they had to live by while they were in the wilderness. Well, is it going to take 40 years for us? It's a pattern, and God does follow patterns. So let's see how and where we go. So number 2 in our notes, joining with Israel results in experiencing Israel's covenant benefits. Now, Romans 11, 13 through 31, we all, I think, are fairly familiar with Romans 11. It's about being grafted into Israel. But I do want to take a little bit of time here, not too much, starting at verse 13. It said, "But I am speaking to you who are Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry, if somehow I might move to jealousy my fellow countrymen and save some of them. For if their rejection is a reconciliation of the world, what will be their acceptance but life from the dead?" Paul is very much about bringing Israel back to a knowledge of Yeshua. We should be about that very same thing. We talk about it, but where are we in actively being engaged in it? Do not rely on Pastor Bruce and Kathleen or Paul Oliver or Vince and Peggy to be those people that are going to do all the work in witnessing to the Jewish people. All of us have to have that attitude that, you know what, when we come together, what are we looking for? Well, I want to get my ears tickled. Oh, that's a great message. I like that one. Yeah, I believe that. Well, you know what? Listening to great messages and going, oh man, that really got to me. I liked it. That is such a superficial relationship with the Lord. He's looking for you and I to actually take what we know and take it to people that need to hear it and to share it with them and bring them. It doesn't matter if they're Jews or non-Jews, but bring people to a knowledge of what you understand about the Lord. And it doesn't matter where you are in the scale. You could be a brand new believer, but bring them to that place and then let somebody else work with them to bring them to a higher place. But if we don't have the insight to look out and say, you know what, if we are in a 50-year pattern and we're 3 years into it and we've just been tested and we're about ready to start on a 40-year disciplinary teaching time frame that'll lead to the last 7 years of this millennium or this jubilee, just maybe we have to get out there and get it started. Pastors are like anybody else. Pastors, well, I got the direction for the church. Well, when the people in the church go up and say, hey, you know what? I really want to see us as a body of believers move in this direction. You know what? Pastors listen. They listen and they redirect, because if it's a bona fide, provable direction from the scripture, and the people are saying, I want to see us really move in regards to the nation of Israel. I can't think of one pastor that I know of that won't listen to that and actually do something to head us in that direction. But if we're all satisfied, just being comfortable, then we will continue as we are. That's just how life works. So I just want to encourage you, don't be afraid to stand up and say, hey, you know what? I really do feel like we need to develop a ministry that has more of an outreach to Israel. And you know what? It can mean anything. You can get people together knitting socks. Anything that you can think of that would be a benefit to people in Israel. There's lots of poor people in Israel that need the love of Christ, the love of Messiah, to be extended to them in all kinds of ways. I mean, there's no limitation as to what could happen. And God might, if you ask him, he might give you a very unique insight and, be able to do something. I know that some people are very much into trying to eliminate abortion in Israel. Imagine in Israel, they're aborting babies because they can't afford to raise children. They don't have the income. There's not enough money. They don't have a good welfare system over there. But what the welfare system should be the church. It should be the church, but it is what it is. So, A in our notes underneath 2, covenant blessings require living within the terms of Israel's covenants. The terms of Israel's covenants are simply those things that when we read the text and we find out God says, I will bless those that bless Israel, that is a term. In other words, you want to be blessed? How do you get blessed? Well, if you bless Israel, God says, I will bless you. That's a covenant. And the term is, you do your part. God says he'll do his part. And so living within the term is pretty simple. Find a way to bless Israel. And God will in turn then bless you. Now, how he blesses you is totally up to him. But I've found out that, you know what? You can trust him. He's a trustworthy God. You may get blessed in a way you weren't expecting. And that's perfectly all right because God sees farther into the future than you do. And so if he blesses you in a certain way, receive it and say, okay, Lord, I don't know what's coming, but you blessed me with this. And so I'm got my eyes open to see what you want me to do with it. And so it's like pay it forward. How much farther forward can we keep paying it? Well, we'll find out, I guess. So, all right. So, B in our notes, only within the covenants of Israel is there a basis for the atonement of Yeshua. Apart from the covenants of Israel, we must realize there is no such thing as a covenant from God with any other people about Yeshua. Yeshua is the Jewish Messiah. He's the Messiah of Israel. He's not the Messiah of America. He's not the Messiah of the English or of anybody else. He is the Jewish Messiah. And God so loved the world that he sent his son as the Jewish Messiah to fulfill the covenant that God had made with Israel, that he would provide a way of salvation. And so we join with Israel and we get the benefit of Yeshua's covenant of salvation and eternal life. But apart from that, we have no basis. And so, a great segment of the Christian community has forgotten that. They just think, oh, well, we're Christians, and so, we get all these benefits. Not apart from Israel, you don't. And that's the key. You have to maintain your relationship with the covenants that God has given Israel. When God says, it upsets me when people do certain things, we can't just shine it on like it doesn't mean anything. If God thinks something's an abomination and we go, well, that doesn't bother me any, well, who are you? And when it's all said and done, who's going to be the one that says, come on in, my good and faithful servant, or depart from me, I don't know you? It's not you, it's the Lord himself. And so these kind of things, when we just kind of shine it on and let it go, are we really being the witness in this world that God has called us to be? And, I'm really concerned for the Christian church because they practice lawlessness. Now, people go, well, yeah, but God's not going to turn all those people away. Well, I don't know what God's going to do. I can only read what he says in his word. If he says, you who practice lawlessness, I don't know you, depart from me. Okay, I kind of know what that means. Will he do it? Well, I think it would be pretty foolhardy to think, no, he'll never do that. You know, he loves everybody. Well, the flood that came upon the world left 8 people. God is willing to take it all the way down to 8. That's a whole lot of people that didn't make the cut. And God doesn't change. You know, so if we just assume that he's so merciful and gracious now that he won't do something similar, I think we're being foolhardy. And I pray that he doesn't do that. He said he's never going to flood the earth again, but you know that I like water better than fire, honestly. I mean, I do. I like water better than fire. You know, yeah, you can swim in water, but you don't do any swimming in fire. You know, just not something I'm looking forward to in the least bit. But you know, there again, I'm just a voice crying in the wilderness, saying, "Hey, you know what? Here we are. Boy, we really have to wake up to our responsibility and be more than what we have been." So, you know, when we're coming back to fellowship, to me, it's like we can't even entertain the idea that we're coming back to what we were before. If we're not coming back greater and stronger and more committed and more dedicated, then this time that we've had sequestered at home, which God has given us to study, to seek him, to look at him, to look at his word, it's been wasted. You know, watching, you know, all the idiots on TV and, you know, all the stuff we have a tendency to do on Facebook and, you know, all of that stuff. Well, has it accomplished anything? I don't know that it has, you know, but nonetheless. Okay, so where are we? Yahweh, number 2 in our Roman numeral, number 2 in our notes. Yahweh restricts all slaughtering of domestic animals for food to be altar ritual sacrifices. Now, this is a very interesting subject because all the way back in Genesis chapter 9, you find out that's the first time that God gave man the ability, it's chapter 9, verse 4, I think, gave man the right to kill animals. Before that, man did not have a right to kill animals for food, only for sacrificial purposes. And if you remember the first animal that was killed, that God is the first one to shed an animal's life blood to make a covering for Adam and Eve. Now, think about this for a moment. Why did God not take the wool off the sheep and make a covering for Adam and Eve to cover up their nakedness? Why did he kill an animal? He didn't have to kill an animal to cover them. Remember, man tried to cover their nakedness with vegetable, greenery, fig leaves or whatever. Well, man, that's what man was used to. Man was a vegetarian. He did not eat meat. He was a vegetarian. All the way onto the ark, the animals did not eat meat. That's why nobody was chewing up their neighbor or anybody else. Okay, they were vegetarian. After they came off the ark, then meat was allowed. That's when God allowed the fear of man to be upon animals, land animals, ocean animals, birds, and so on and so forth. Only then. And God gave man the free will to kill and eat meat. The blood was restricted because life was in the blood. Okay? All the way back in Genesis tells us very clearly life's in the blood. Don't eat the blood. All right? But they could eat the meat. It wasn't restricted. Only by the time we get to Leviticus does God then restrict the eating of meat. Why is he doing that? He's doing it because he's teaching Israel. If we read carefully in Leviticus 17, we find that Israel had been sacrificing outside of the camp area, believing that if it's outside the camp area, it doesn't count. And we can do whatever we want outside of camp. And God is saying, no, you cannot. Everything, I'm going to restrict you. You cannot just kill anything, anywhere, for food that has blood in it, except in the camp. Now, that's only talking about domesticated animals. If you read there in the chapter, you find out it's talking about cows and goats and sheep and those animals that are domesticated. Wild animals, when you get to the end of the chapter, if you're out hunting, you can slaughter them for food because they're not acceptable as sacrifices. But anything that could be used as a sacrifice before God that had blood in its system had to be restricted and only ritually slaughtered and sacrificed within the camp. And we find out that part of the reason for that is because Israel was going outside of the camp and they were sacrificing to goat demons. If you remember last week when we talked about Azazel, Azazel was a demon of the wilderness. And they took a goat and put all the sins on the goat and sent it out to Azazel. Azazel is not a goat demon, I don't believe, because the goat that went out carried the sins of Israel back to him who was the perpetrator of sin. All right? But the goat demons were a whole different thing, that they also were part of the wilderness, and Israel and idol worship, just like in Egypt. Remember, they were 400 years there. They learned a lot of things in Egypt, and they continue to sacrifice to these demons that ruled and reigned in the wilderness areas. And so God is saying, no, I'm putting a stop to that. I want you under control, and if I have to, I'm going to do this in order to put you under control. And that's what he's done in chapter 17. He has restricted everything, and it made it hard for Israel. It wasn't easy. You have to remember, if you're going to ritually slaughter an animal and you bring it before God, it had to be the best animal that you had. You couldn't just bring any old animal. It had to be the best. So if you're going to eat meat, and people had developed a taste for meat, if you're going to eat meat, then it has to be the very best. Yes. I can't hear you there.
Were turtle doves or doves, were those domesticated? Because they use those for sacrifices.
What was?
Doves?
Oh, doves?
Yes.
Yeah, doves are domesticated birds, but birds are a little bit different than because birds, the way that they are killed, basically you take your thumbnail and you use it to sever the jugular vein in the neck. For the bigger animals, that was more of a ritualistic killing where you took the blood and you used it in the sacrificial rite. But doves, yeah, lots of people keep doves. So if they had to use them, they had to have them at hand. And, so that, they are a domesticated bird. So, but as far as the other animals go, all of the animals, every one of them that's listed here, are sacrificial animals that can be used for food and for sacrifice. But it was an expensive thing. You had to bring it, and if you came, you didn't just bring a peace offering, which is recalled for, because the peace offering, remember, the zabav, is the one that you brought that everybody got to share, the priest, God, and you. So you got to take some home with you. But you didn't just bring that one. You also, if you're going to come before the Lord, you had to bring an olah offering, which was going to be an animal that would be completely consumed. So meat became very expensive, and it became very much a royal pain in order to prepare for having a meal that included meat. You have to think, you gotta get it, you gotta have the best one, you gotta take it down, you gotta go through the procedure, you gotta take a sheep with you to offer, or whatever. It was not just an easy thing to accomplish. God made it difficult because he wanted people to understand, I am the Lord your God, and you are to be holy as I am holy. Now, I'm saying that today for this reason. Do not think that if we start in this process of God saying, I need to bring my people back to me, that it's just going to be, oh, lovely and sweet. We're all going to have a wonderful time at church. The Spirit will flow. We'll sing. We'll be wonderfully, everything will be perfectly fine. We've had that. We've had all the freedom to do whatever we wanted in church. And where has it taken us? And I'm telling you, you got to look at the big picture. Don't look at our little fellowship. Look at the whole picture of Christianity. Where has that taken us? We are diversified. I mean, that, what is it? I can't remember what the word is, where you have all the different Christian symbols coexist. Whew. I mean, boy, it's taken us down that path big time. Like I've told people in the past, Sheila's home church, they brought in transcendental meditation into the church so that people could try it out to see if they liked it. Really, into God's church, you brought that stuff so people could give it a try. And you think, oh, well, we're so broad-minded. Yeah, you're broad-minded, are you? You're an idiot. But nonetheless, it's what people do when we have total freedom. And God has, by his pattern, he has taken his people and said, okay, I let you go. I see what you're into. I watch what you do. And now I'm going to start restricting you down to doing what I want you to do. Okay. Is it going to happen? I'm willing to wager sums of money, even though I'm not a gambler. I just look at the patterns and go, it's what God has done in the past. Yeah. He gives us freedom. And my mom used to say, I'll give you enough rope to hang yourself. And boy, have we fulfilled that little statement many times. So, all right. So, all procedures, in our notes, all procedures must be followed, and failure to do so's penalty is severe. Leviticus 17:4. I mean, when we read 17:4, it's like, wait, what? Really? That's what's going to happen? It says, if somebody slaughtered something outside the camp, and then it's not brought it into the doorway of the tent of meeting to present it as a sin offering to the Lord before the tabernacle of the Lord, blood guiltness is to be reckoned to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. Now, let me say this. Blood guiltness is a synonym for murder. It carries the same penalty. All right, so the penalty to be cut off in Hebrew is karet. It is death by heaven's hand. Now, heaven's hand is its death by God. The rabbis and the Jewish community understands very clearly that to be cut off, there's several aspects of it. It could mean early death in their notes. Well, I better finish up. I'll do A first. Cut off is divine punishment as part of Yahweh's justice system for rebelling against Yahweh. When you do not follow the procedures that God has established, for example, and bringing whatever meat you want to eat, and this was the case here. We're only talking about this case right now. But the same thing follows through when God puts a restriction on us. If we do not follow through and keep his procedure, that is open rebelliousness against God. Remember, we went through that in Numbers chapter 15, verses 27 through 31, that when you do high-handed sin, it is rebelliousness against God, and he calls it blasphemy. And when you blaspheme against God, there is no forgiveness for that. Now, meaning that you will pay the penalty for whatever action you have taken or failed to take. In this case, to be cut off, it means that God will enact his punishment upon you at his will when he is ready to do it. Number one in our notes speaks about this. It says, to be cut off represents early death, but not necessarily immediate death. The sentence just hangs there waiting on God. It just hung over you. Like you know that God is going to do something with you, but he's not doing it on your timing. He's going to do it on his timing. And so, when you know you've rebelled against God and you haven't done what he said to do, and you know you deserve to be disciplined, it hangs there. You know it's coming, but when? I mean, to me, I would rather be disciplined like right now. Wait till your father gets home. Okay, dad's coming at 3:30. I know what's going to happen at 3:30. In this circumstance, God will get back to you on his timing. In 5 minutes, 5 years? When? To me, that would bother me. Okay. But it just hangs there waiting on God. It can also mean being expelled from the community, excommunicated, out of fellowship. 3, being permanently separated in death from one's ancestors. What's that talking about? Well, you and I understand that if we're saved and our ancestors are saved, we get to spend eternity with them. But apart from that, some of our ancestors are not going to be there. Now, how do we deal with that? I don't know. I mean, I know God says he'll wipe every tear from our eyes when we're in heaven, but I don't know what those tears are about. Okay, it could be tears of somebody not being there that we want to be there. It could be tears of recognition of what an idiot I was for all the 70 some years that I lived on the earth, and I really didn't do what I should have done. I don't know what the tears are about, but I know God says that there will be, and he will deal with those tears and wipe them. So, number 4, the death of a child, a descendant, ending the family line. If God deals with you, he doesn't have to deal with you personally. He can deal with your family. Remember, I mean, now we gotta keep this in context. All the way through the first covenant agreement, we come to a place where the sins of the fathers are visited on the 3rd and 4th generation. That's what this is talking about. We also come to the place where that was changed and it was transformed, where everyone would then die for their own sins and not for the sins of others. But here in Leviticus, this is what's being presented. And we have to look at it and realize, thank God that God did transform things. But at the very same time, we must accept the reality that God who transforms things, if he changed it one way, can he choose to turn it back? We have a tendency, oh no, he would never do that. Well, I trust God, but I'm also aware that God is a sovereign God. And if he decides, you know what, this group of people right here, they need to experience how serious I am. They think, well, if I deserve it, so I should just get punished. Well, you know what? You are going to be touched more by the innocent being punished for what you did than you will be being punished for what you know you did. See, I mean, really, I do not want anybody that I love to be punished for my stupidity. I mean, I do not want that. I will take the punishment, but I don't want them to have to take it. That would hurt me more than whatever God would do to me personally. You see, I mean, but we have to look at that and realize the reality of what it really means. God is saying, listen, I'm serious about what we're talking about. I want you to understand that blood to me is an extremely serious commodity. I have made it and give it very specifically for 2 purposes. One is for life and one is for atonement. Anything else you do with it is a misuse of it, and I will discipline you for it. So, number 2 in our notes here, blood guiltness is equivalent to murder. In Hebrew, it's shafak dam, to shed blood. It just means, in our notes, the crime of shedding blood. It's a synonym for murder, and it's the improper and non-sanctified killing of domestic animals. In Leviticus chapter 17, verse 4. Now, if God is this serious about the shedding of blood of domestic animals, how serious do you think he is about the shedding blood of innocent people? And when we have to look at this, we have to realize when you get over into Deuteronomy 21, if a murder victim is out somewhere in the field and nobody knows who killed the person or what happened, it's the responsibility of the nearest village to investigate and to go through the procedure of satisfying God's requirements so that the curse of misuse blood is removed from the land. Because no matter where an innocent person's blood has been shed, that blood, remember Cain and Abel? The blood of Abel was crying out from the earth. There was a curse incurred on the earth because of the shedding of innocent blood. It's the same today. That has never, ever changed. In America and around the world, we have slaughtered millions of babies that are totally innocent. And we have not put to death those that took their lives. When you read in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy 21, we are obligated to put to death all murderers. And when you commit abortion, that abortionist is murdering an innocent baby, shedding innocent blood. And that blood is and produces a curse that when that person is not killed, resides on the earth. Now, Israel, the land of Israel today is cursed for that same reason. How many people are killed in Israel, not even counting the aborted babies? But how many people are killed in Israel that they don't know who has done it? That's why they're so diligent to search and find out who killed, what group came in and killed these people. Because they understand it's a curse on the land if you do not deal with the murderer. But even then, Israel is not putting these people to death. They're putting them in jail. And then the PLO or whoever, Abbas or whatever group is doing it, they're paying the families money for killing people. And it's being allowed. Do you really think God is going to just wink at that for how much longer? And in America, we're doing the same thing. You know, we put people in jail and keep them there. I mean, Charlie Manson, how long was he in jail and died of old age? He was a curse on the land. The other night, we were at a lady's house here in Gavilan Hills, and we actually prayed to break and reverse the curse of those that have been murdered in this area that we live in. Where you live in your house, in your neighborhood, you really need to sit down and go through and pray and repent and turn to God and to have the curse removed from your townhouse, from the house you live in, your neighborhood, you know, the city you're in, whatever. Because, I mean, like right here, I know just down the road from us, they found a torso in a plastic bag. No head, no hands. You can't identify the person. And did they ever find the person that committed the murder? I have no idea. But, you know, I mean, that, when you look at what God considers to be misuse of blood and the curse that is incurred because of it, it's a very, very serious matter. And we really have to deal with that blood guiltness. So, and God is in Leviticus 17, he's talking about it when it's done to an animal that's killed outside of the jurisdiction of God's ordained place where sacrifices are to be made. Well, if he's that concerned about an animal, you got to believe he's more concerned about a human being that's made in the very image of God himself. And that means that baby is in that image. I don't care how old the baby is. You know, that makes no difference. So Yahweh's number one in our notes, Yahweh's restriction on blood, Genesis 9:4, you shall not eat flesh with its life, with its blood. Started right from then, and that has never changed. A in our notes, blood is unsuitable for food, period. People go to England and they come back and say, oh yeah, we had haggis, which is basically a blood sausage, I guess, or something, and they come back, oh yeah, well, like it's a badge of honor that they ate this garbage. And, it's like, it's totally restricted by God. And these are Christian people, and they just don't get it. They don't understand. And, we really have to get the idea that it's an abomination to God. And, if we keep poking our finger in his eye long enough, I can guarantee you he'll get tired of it. And when he does, we will be the ones that'll be paying the generation that it will be the ones that will be paying the penalty for this ongoing ridiculousness. So, okay. So, be in our notes, blood, soul, physical purpose is for life. You take the blood out of any animal that has blood in it, and that animal dies. Its sole purpose to be inside of the animal because it is life to the animal. Its sole spiritual purpose is atonement. It's atonement. All kinds of satanic rituals use blood, and, vampires, and, all of that garbage that's out there. They are misusing blood, and it is an abomination to God. And, who's supposed to be regulating it? Again, well, it must be a spirit. No, it's not the spirit. It's called the church. If the church will stand back and tolerate it and let things go on, the world will do it. But see, like I said, we've regulated all that authority to a whole nother group. So, okay, be in our notes. Shafar dam, the shedding of blood, applies to most cases where blood is misused. Now, obviously, murder is the misuse of blood because it ends life. Drinking blood is a misuse because blood is for atonement, not for sustenance. Ritual sacrifice outside of Yahweh's ordained temple is unacceptable and is a misuse of blood. If you're using it for a sacrifice to anything other than Yahweh, and there is no way to do that right now. I mean, to take a chicken and to cut its throat and swing it around your head, as the Orthodox Jews are doing today in Yom Kippur, that is a misuse of blood. They're doing the very thing God says not to do, because there is no temple. And without a temple, there is no place to have a sacrifice that is accomplishing atonement, which is what God set it up to accomplish. And so it's wrong. And it's, that's why I say we can't just go, well, the Jewish community, they knows what they're doing. We'll just follow their example. Hogwash. You've got to know the text and realize what the scripture is telling us and follow that. Don't follow the Christian church. Don't follow the Orthodox Jewish community or any other group out there. Follow the word of God. It's clear enough. We can understand it. So, number 4, sacrifice to another god or demon is a misuse of blood. There is no other God. There is only one God. Every other thing that claims to be a God is a false God. And it has nothing to do with what God has established as being the right thing to use blood for. So, Number C in our notes, or letter C in our notes, the Jerusalem Council restrains, address the misuse of blood in Acts chapter 15, verse 20. Remember? When they went to the Jerusalem Council and talked to James, they said, okay, now, the Gentiles don't have to become Jews to come into a relationship with Yeshua. If we just want to have them in fellowship, they believe in Yeshua. So what kind of rules should we give to those people? And so it tells us there, in Acts chapter 15. Let me turn over there. Whoops, I just flipped right by it. In Acts chapter 15, verse 20. And I said, therefore, it is my judgment that we do not trouble those who are turning to God from among the Gentiles, but that we write to them that they abstain from things contaminated by idols and from fornication. And the fornication they're talking about, let's be honest with this, it's not just picking up a girl and you all go out and have a sexual relationship. This fornication is talking about the fornication that was taking place in the pagan temples with the priestesses that worked the temples. That was part of the worship. You go in and have sex with a priestess. And oh boy, yeah, everybody wants to join that church. But it's forbidden. And from what is strangled, the reason that anything is strangled, it is not a proper way of ending anything's life. God said the proper way of slaughtering an animal is to cut the jugular vein. It's relatively painless. The animal bleeds, the brain shuts down, the animal collapses and dies. The pain is not involved. Try it yourself, folks. Grab onto your throat and squeeze real hard and see how long it takes you to die. Okay? You will find it extremely uncomfortable. Okay? It is not the proper way to sacrifice an animal. So, God is just saying this is the real. And he says, and from blood. The issue of blood goes all the way back to what we're talking about here in Leviticus 17, and we will talk about in Deuteronomy 21. Blood is made specifically for two purposes, one for life and one for atonement, and that's it. Do not use it for anything else. All kinds of people are worried about, well, when I cook a steak, it's got, blood in it. And, I like my steak bloody. Well, just be wise. I don't know if you can wring a steak out and get it so that it's nothing but gray matter. But, just be wise. God says, this is what I want. Just submit to him. Do what he wants. I'm not coming over to your house and, going to pick up your steak and look and see if I can squeeze anything out. That misses the whole point. It's a waste of time. So, all right. So, that was a Jerusalem Council. I had to move my computer because I couldn't see what was on my other screen. So, number 3 in our notes, Israel was to stop all sacrifices outside of Israel's camp. The reason for that, we already said, but I want to read through it just to make sure that we don't just go on the basis of what I'm saying. God is pretty clear about what he wants and how he wants us to function. So in verses 5 through 9, he said, the reason is so that the sons of Israel may bring their sacrifices, which they were sacrificing in the open field, that they may bring them into the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting to the priest, and sacrifice them as sacrifices of peace offerings to the Lord. The priest shall sprinkle the blood on the altar of the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting, and offer up the fat and smoke as a soothing aroma to the Lord. They shall no longer sacrifice their sacrifices to the goat demons with which they play the harlot. This shall be a permanent statute to them throughout their generation. Then you shall say to them, any man from the house of Israel or from the aliens who sojourn among them, who offers a burnt offering or sacrifice and does not bring it to the doorway of the tent of meeting to offer it to the Lord, that man also shall be cut off from his people. Now, where it says in verse 8, who offers a burnt offering, of course, that's the old law. And the other word where it says sacrifice, when you look it up in Hebrews, it's zavah, which means the peace offering. So they were to stop all outside sacrifices. God wanted the blood to be used only the way that he prescribed it to be used, period, from all the animals that were acceptable as sacrificial animals. So, Israel and all sojourners are to stop sacrificing to the goat demons permanently. That's verse 7. Wild game, on the other hand, could be slaughtered outside of camp, but its blood was to be covered up. You were to cover it up with dirt. And that was acceptable because those animals were not acceptable to be offered as a sacrifice. They could be eaten as food, but they were not to be used as sacrificial animals. So that makes all the difference. Anything that was to be used as a sacrificial animal had very specific restrictions. And so that's what God is trying to teach. So, foreigner note, special instructions for an animal that dies naturally or is killed by another, verses 14 through 16. Now, there was no restriction about eating an animal that died naturally. Now, people today go, well, you know, of course, a lot of people are vegetarian anyway, but a lot of people go, I wouldn't eat an animal if I found it dead along the road. Well, that all depends on when your last meal was and what you understand about decomposition. I mean, you know, roadkill is a viable meat in a lot of parts of the country that are rural. And people eat it on a regular basis. And there's nothing wrong with it. God says it's perfectly fine. But if you do eat something that has been killed accidentally, or that, and by the way, it should be something that God says it's acceptable as food. You know, rabbits, squirrels, chipmunks, you know, skunks, possums, those kind of things, raccoons, are not considered to be animals that God says his people can eat. People eat them all the time, but they're not supposed to be. But a deer is an animal that does chew the cud, has a split hoof, and can be eaten. But, you know, if you do eat it, the only thing that happens to you is you become unclean. Now, being unclean just means you have to remain outside the camp until evening. The further restriction is that you remain outside the camp until evening, you immerse in water, and you wash your clothes. Now, if you fail to do those things, then there is a price to pay that is beyond what you would have had to do if you obeyed God. If you do not wash your clothes and you do not immerse, or one or the other, then you have to bring an Hashem, a reparation offering, because you have trespassed against Yahweh, and he wants to be receiving a payment from you. So you have to bring whatever the reparation offering for you would be, plus you also have to bring an olah offering. So the point being that if you want to eat an animal that was killed or accidentally died or died of natural causes, you can, but if you're going to do any of it, make sure you follow God's instruction. Otherwise, it's going to start costing you money. God is very much into teaching us, and he is not above making it painful if we will not listen. So I just want to make sure that we get this idea that in chapter 17, God is talking about the importance of blood and what we do with it. And he is very willing to discipline us if we misuse blood in any way. Now, he doesn't change. And so consequently, the reason I'm making such a big deal about chapter 17 is because we are right at the beginning of that time, the 17th of Tammuz, in which God disciplines his people. If he is not happy with us, we need to be looking and paying attention to see if on the 17th something begins to transpire. Now, on the 16th, I'd suggest we all are on our face before the Lord and making sure that we have cleaned the slate, if you will, for you and I on a personal level. Just my perspective, not thus saith the Lord. It's just I look at it and go, you know what? The safe money would be, yeah, I've probably done a few things that maybe hasn't really pleased the Lord as much as I might think. So it never harms to repent, get on our face, and I'll go back and fill up, get the ones that I didn't answer. Is that what? Go ahead, Dila. You're cutting out, Dila. I can't hear you.
The 17th of Tammuz. What day is that?
I don't have my calendar right here.
I think it was July 9th.
Okay, I'll go with that. So anyway, if you become unclean, of course, you want to return to clean status because you move from holy all the way down to unclean. And then you have to come back to clean in order to go back to holy. That was the process that Israel had to go through. Now, I'm going to say this, but because it's true, with Yeshua, we've said it before, but I'll say it again. What Yeshua has accomplished for us is in the spiritual realm. In the physical realm, you and I can become unclean very easily. But in the spiritual realm, what God has provided for us, he has made us holy because of his shed blood. So in the spiritual realm, on an instantaneous, ongoing, forever and every moment and every aspect of time in consideration, Yahweh's or Yeshua's atonement before Yahweh is an instantaneous right now moment. It's not repeated like he's doing it over and over and over and over again. It is that it's continuously, actively a reality. There is no time in the spiritual realm. God is not on a time frame of, oh, well, it's, 7:45 today. No, sorry, it doesn't work that way. Here, we're on a time frame. I sinned today. That means today I became unclean. But at the very moment that I sinned, what Yeshua has provided for me in the timeless realm before the Father, I am completely exonerated from that sin. It is an instantaneous atonement for me. So I never enter into the unclean state. There's no way for me to get clean without a temple and without all the procedures. Now, I can immerse, and I should repent and confess my sin. Remember, 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sin and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So we have an obligation, but the reality of it is my obligation is to fulfill what God has revealed to me that I am obligated to do. But what Yeshua has provided for me is ongoing and instantaneous on a, you can't even say moment by moment basis. It's more instantaneous than that. In other words, if I sin and I didn't get to the place of, Father, forgive me, I'm confessing that I did this sin against you, would my salvation be lost? The answer is no. Some people believe that way. The Calvinists say you can't lose your sin. Other people believe you can lose it every time you sin. So the question is, where are you on the scale? I'm on the scale of God is my Savior. Yes, I sin. I'm responsible to confess my sin, and he will be faithful and just to forgive me. That's my responsibility. As long as I can do that, I'm going to do it. If I should sin, and in the process of me sinning, I should die, what happens to me? Oh, too bad. You missed it. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. And I base it on the fact that Yeshua went down into Sheol and he preached or spoke at least to those in Sheol and led captivity captive. If he was willing to do it with those, I have a feeling he'd be willing to do it with those of us that quote unquote sinned a second before we died. If I'm wrong, you know what? You won't miss me. Well, I mean, it's just the way it is. If I'm wrong, you will not miss me. I won't be there, but you won't miss me. So, on the other hand, if I'm right, well, then we'll all be there. We'll all be there. And I prefer to think in those terms. You know, I'm not anybody's judge. I'm just the guy that stirs the pot and hopefully causes us all to think a bit. And if we can think a bit and put it in perspective, I think we can gain some ground. Now, in chapter 21 of Deuteronomy, it's not in our notes, but I do really want us to, you really should read chapter 21 and take the time to think it through, because blood guiltness on the land is a serious, serious matter. I mean, the land, remember, the whole world is waiting for the revelation of the sons of God. Why? Because the earth is under a curse. The curse on the earth is because of blood guiltness. If we understand blood guiltness and we intercede on behalf of the land that we live on, the house that we live in, the territory that's under our jurisdiction, we can release the land to be fruitful again and to begin to produce and grow and do what God established the land for. Now, you know, even in India, things will grow in India. And they will grow out here where I'm at. You might have to deal with ground squirrels or whatever, but you know, things will grow, and we really need to understand that right now. You know, I go to the grocery store. I have to. If I want to eat, I have to go to the grocery store, and I pay attention. I watch to see what's there. I was at Alpha Beta just over the weekend, and there weren't any frozen vegetables. And there was a sign saying that we are working on finding a new supplier for our frozen vegetables because our original supplier has gone out of business because of COVID-19.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, I don't know what they've done. I haven't been back since. But when I was there were a few bags of peas, a couple of things of corn, and not much else. It was pretty barren.
There's probably some okra at least.
You know, okra is very good for you, by the way. It just slides right down. Anyway, I'm just saying, you know, we really need to pay attention. And even though it's a problem for a lot of us, we really should start growing some things and learning how to grow some things just as a safety measure. I mean, you can grow lettuce. There's lots of things like, you know, if you have beets or something, you cut the top off. You know, you can put the beet in dirt and it'll start growing again. Celery does the same thing. Lots of things will regrow. You know, I'm trying to think of the lettuce that has, it's the tall kind. I forget what they call it. I always buy it, but I don't know what they call it. Anyway, yeah, if you cut that off, it'll start growing more lettuce.
You mean romaine lettuce, Pastor?
Yeah, romaine. Yes, exactly. So, you know, why not? Try your hand. You know, I mean, right now, as long as, you know, we're so spoiled, you know, as long as I can go to the store and get it, I don't want to bother to grow anything. Well, the problem with that is that if you don't start growing and the supply does disappear, you realize most things take 45 to 60 days to grow to a size where you can eat anything. So, you know, you might think that through. I don't know how long you like to fast, but
45 days.
45 minutes, yeah. Me too. But you know, it just it doesn't take much to grow things. You can grow it in your house or on your balcony and stuff, and you know, there's a lot of satisfaction in that. And you know, I mean, you teach a woman to grow, and you know, she supplies the whole neighborhood with zucchini. You know. One zucchini will produce 100 zucchinis.
Yeah, really.
Of various sizes. But you know what? If it gets to the place where it's necessary, a little zucchini plant instead of a plant that you can't eat living in your house makes a little more sense to me. You know, a lot of people have house plants, and you know, they're good. I mean, all plants in the house are good. They produce the kind of stuff that it helps the air in your home to be healthier. Well, if you're going to have a plant, why not plant something that will produce something, a squash or something, you know, anything simple, you know. But if you have it in the house, you have to realize you need to take a Q-tip and pollinate it yourself, because unless you let the bees in or you set it out, the bees aren't going to fly in your house and pollinate. You swatted too many, they're on to you. All right, so there we have it. There's our study in Leviticus 17. Now, chapter 18, if I remember right, it's going to be about Yom Kippur. Is it or not? I can't remember. I better look. Oh no.
Mine says laws on immoral
It's about
relations.
sex.
Immoral relations.
Yeah, that's why I said sex.